The cold morning air in Washington, D.C. wrapped the federal courthouse in a heavy silence. Reporters gathered outside, holding cameras and microphones, waiting for what they believed would be a simple hearing. Karoline Leavitt, the White House. Press secretary stepped out of her car with calm steps and sharp eyes. She was no stranger to pressure. She had faced heated press briefings, tough interviews, and political storms. But as she walked towards the courthouse entrance, something felt wrong. Inside the courtroom was strangely quiet. Staff members avoided her gaze. Even the federal guards seemed stiff, their eyes fixed on the floor instead of the people passing. By Karoline's instincts, shaped by years in the brutal world of politics, told her this was not an ordinary day. It was a setup. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts was already seated on the high bench. His face was cold, hard, and distant. He did not look at her as she took her place at the defendant's table. There was no greeting, no sign of regular courtroom procedures. His fingers tapped lightly on the wooden surface, but his eyes remained locked on the files in front of him. Karoline's lawyer glanced at her nervously, whispering that something was off. She nodded slightly, but stayed focused. The federal prosecutor, Michael Harper, sat across the room, flipping through his notes, looking confused as if he was missing a piece of the puzzle. Without any opening statements, without any evidence being shown, Roberts began to speak. His voice echoed through the silent room. The court finds the defendant, Karoline Leavitt, in violation of the Federal Communications Act, Section 204. The fine is set at $50,000 to be paid immediately. The ruling is final. The words fell like cold stones. Reporters outside, hearing only the ruling through the courthouse speakers, began to type headlines. White House official fined. Karoline Leavitt silenced. But inside, the atmosphere was not just about the fine. It was about something deeper, something hidden. Karoline's hands remained steady on the table. She had come prepared to defend herself, ready with documents and arguments, but she was not given the chance to speak. The case had already been decided before she entered the room. She stood slowly and carefully, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, with all due respect, I have not yet been given the opportunity to present any arguments or evidence. Isn't this against the standard legal process? Roberts narrowed his eyes, his voice now sharp. The decision has been made. There is no need for further discussion. The law is clear. Karoline stared at him. She realized this wasn't a hearing. It was a warning. The fine was not just about money. It was a message. She was being silenced, stopped from speaking on topics that might expose powerful people. The court was not protecting justice today. It was protecting something else, something dangerous. Prosecutor Harper shifted in his seat, glancing between Roberts and Karoline. His face showed signs of discomfort. He had not expected this ruling. He had prepared for a normal hearing with arguments and discussions. But now he sat quietly, trapped in the middle of something much bigger. Karoline's lawyer whispered to her, "We should appeal immediately." But she shook her head slightly. Not yet. She had to understand why this was happening before making her next move. The judge banged the gavel once and stood, his robe sweeping behind him as he exited the courtroom without another word. The decision was over in minutes, but the real story was just beginning. Karoline left the courtroom calmly. Outside, the press rushed toward her, shouting questions. Do you accept the ruling? Are you guilty of the media violation? Will you pay the fine? She stopped, looked straight into the cameras, and said, "Sometimes silence is not defeat. Sometimes silence is a strategy." The reporters didn't fully understand her words. They thought this was the end. They wrote quick stories about her fine and her silence. But they missed the most important part. The courtroom wasn't the real battlefield. As Karoline got into her car, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. There. Moving faster than we thought. Be careful, MH. This was from Michael Harper, the prosecutor. Why would he contact her directly? Her driver looked at her through the mirror. Where to, ma'am? Karoline thought for a moment. The courthouse had given her no chance to speak, but outside she still had power. The media, the public, the truth. Take me to the White House, she said. It's time to plan the next step. Her mind worked quickly. She knew this wasn't about a media law violation. It was about something she had been investigating, a network of influence. That connected top judges, international business figures, and secret lobbyists. She had seen pieces of it before, but hadn't fully understood its depth. Now it was clear. They were using their power to crush anyone who came too close. The fine was meant to push her away, but it only brought her closer to the real fight, and she wasn't going to back down. As the car moved through the streets of Washington, Karoline's phone buzzed again. Another message from Harper. I have something. Let's talk. Off the record, Karoline's lips curved into a slight, knowing smile. The game had just changed, and she was ready to play the next morning. Washington buzzed with headlines about the fine. News channels looped clips of Karoline leaving the courthouse in silence. Commentators debated whether she was guilty or simply caught in political crossfire. But no one knew the real weight of what had happened inside that courtroom. They had seen the surface, but Karoline was already moving beneath it. She sat in her White House office, her team carefully reviewing the media's reaction. Most of the stories painted her as defeated, silenced by the system. Karoline let them think that, at least for now, she needed that illusion. It gave her space to plan. Her phone buzzed again. The same unknown number that messaged her yesterday. Michael Harper, we need to meet. They're watching me now. This isn't just about you. It's much bigger. Karoline immediately responded, arranging to meet him in a public park, away from cameras and predictable locations. She chose a place where high-level staff wouldn't be seen, a quiet bench near a small fountain, where political power rarely walked. When Harper arrived, he looked more like a nervous journalist than a confident federal prosecutor. His eyes scanned the area as he sat, speaking low. I wasn't supposed to be there yesterday, he began. The case was pushed to me last minute. I didn't even know your name was on the file until I walked into the courtroom. Karoline listened carefully, nodding but not interrupting. I was given strict instructions. No discussion, no evidence. Just push the fine through. I thought it was unusual, but when I saw Robert's behavior, I realized he didn't care about law or fairness. He was following orders. Karoline's eyes narrowed. From who? Harper hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he passed her a folded piece of paper. This is what I found buried in the internal communications. The case wasn't built here. It started in a private meeting between Roberts and an international legal advisor connected to the Eastern Trade Alliance. Karoline's heartbeat quickened. The Eastern Trade Alliance was a powerful, quiet force known for shaping policies in developing countries through secret financial deals and backdoor diplomacy. But their influence in the U.S. had always been considered rumor, till now, Harper continued. They've been quietly using obscure sections of the federal communications. Act 2 shut down voices tied to certain investigations. I tracked 3 other cases like yours, all buried, all silenced. Karoline realized this wasn't just about her media comments. It was about something else, something she had touched during her recent press briefings. The secret financial links between US court officials and offshore accounts tied to the alliance. She had spoken briefly about these concerns at a previous White House press conference. She didn't think anyone had noticed, but someone did. Harper leaned closer. Roberts is protecting something. And now they're watching me too. I'll be reassigned within days, maybe sooner. I need to get this evidence out before I lose access. Karoline looked at the paper again. The trail of transactions, the names, the dates, it was real. You're risking your career, she said softly. Harper shook his head. No, I'm risking my life. Karoline's instincts told her that everything was moving fast. She had to act before the system locked all the doors. But who could she trust? Not the usual media outlets. They would get blocked. Their stories would vanish. In legal smoke, she remembered an independent journalist she had worked with years ago. Mia Lark, someone who built a reputation for exposing corruption without bowing to political pressure. Mia worked fast, published fast, and most importantly, didn't ask permission. Karoline sent a message. Need to meet. Urgent. Full story. Proof in hand. No time to lose. Within the hour, Mia agreed. Back in the White House, Karoline's team started noticing unusual activity. Documents they had access to yesterday were suddenly locked. Requests for internal files were being denied. It was happening. The walls were closing in. That night, Karoline met Mia in a quiet hotel cafe. Harper arrived shortly after, carefully bringing 2 flash drives, one for Karoline, one for Mia. He explained how the network used technical legal tricks to impose fines and silencing orders, all under the cover of protecting national security. Mia asked the right questions, and Harper provided the details. Offshore accounts. Secret meetings. By morning, Washington was on fire. Mia Lark's report hit every independent news platform within hours. The story exploded across social media like a storm no one could contain. Secret financial web links U.S. Supreme Court to Eastern trade. Alliance Chief Justice John Roberts accused of international collusion. The major networks hesitated. Some too afraid to touch it, others quietly waiting to see if the story would survive the first wave of legal threats. But by then, it was too late. The internet didn't sleep. The hashtags were trending. People from around the country, even overseas, were reading the evidence for themselves. The documents Harper leaked were clear. Offshore accounts? It's unusual. Financial patterns. Direct communication trails between Roberts and Alliance representatives. Inside the White House, Karoline sat in her office, calm but alert. Her team monitored the reactions in real time. Her silence over the past few days now looked less like defeat and more like strategy. She wasn't silenced. She was preparing. The first official response came quickly. Roberts' office issued a short statement calling the report reckless and misleading. They denied any wrongdoing and accused Karoline of weaponizing the media to avoid her fine. Karoline barely blinked. She knew that would be their first move: discredit, distract. She had expected worse. She prepared for the next step, a live interview. Not with the networks that might cut her feed, but on an international platform that couldn't be silenced. Al Jazeera English. She arranged to appear within hours, bypassing American channels entirely. When the interview went live, millions watched. The anchor wasted no time. Ms. Leavitt, your silence after the fine was widely viewed as an admission of guilt. Why now? Karoline looked directly into the camera, her voice steady. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is a weapon. I needed them to believe I had no fight left. I needed them to look away. And they did. But now the fight begins. The interview cut sharply through the noise. She laid out the financial trails, the communications Harper uncovered, and most importantly, she explained how Roberts' rushed fine wasn't just about punishing her. It was about shutting down a thread of questions that, if followed, would reveal a much larger corruption. The public reaction was immediate. Protests began forming outside the federal courthouse. Independent lawmakers demanded an emergency inquiry. Some mainstream journalists, now forced by public pressure, started covering the story. But Karoline knew this wouldn't go unanswered. The system would strike back. That afternoon, she received an anonymous message. They will try to discredit you. They have surveillance footage. They will twist it. Be ready. Within hours, a new video surfaced. A carefully edited clip showing Karoline in what looked like a private conversation with an Alliance-linked consultant weeks before the hearing. The video, taken out of context, was meant to suggest she was working with the same group she was exposing. The clip hit major networks fast. Headlines shifted. The public wavered. Some began calling her a fraud. Karoline didn't panic. She called Mia. Release the full video. All of it. Mia responded quickly. Already on it. The full video showed the complete meeting. Karoline wasn't collaborating. She was confronting the consultant, warning him about American sovereignty. The cut version had been a trap. This release came with time-stamped footage and audio records that crushed the fake narrative in less than a day. The people who had tried to destroy Karoline's credibility now looked desperate. Karoline's team pushed harder. They released more documents, more communication logs, showing how Roberts had repeatedly fast-tracked rulings that benefited alliance-connected corporations. International news outlets started calling it the Roberts scandal. Inside the courthouse, Roberts remained silent, but pressure mounted. Several justices distanced themselves from him. Some quietly spoke to the press under the condition of anonymity, expressing concern that the integrity of the court was collapsing under public distrust. Karoline wasn't finished. She requested an emergency Senate hearing. The Speaker, after seeing the growing public outrage, agreed. The hearing was scheduled within days. When Karoline arrived at Capitol Hill, the energy outside was electric. Protesters waved signs supporting her, calling for transparency. Reporters surrounded her, shouting questions. She answered only one. This isn't about me. It's about the system we were told to trust. It's about who controls the truth. I will not be silenced. Inside the Senate chamber, senators from both sides of the aisle were present. Cameras broadcast the hearing live to millions. The stakes couldn't be higher. Karoline's calm but unshakable presence stood in direct contrast to the frantic efforts from Roberts' defense team, who tried to delay the proceedings. But the evidence was on the table now. Documents, timelines, communications. The story was no longer just Karoline Leavitt had become a national reckoning. As the hearing began, the world watched. The trap Roberts had set to silence her was now collapsing around him. Karoline had turned the fine into a battlefield, and this time she wasn't fighting alone. Inside the Senate hearing, the air was sharp, heavy with expectation. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. It was about the system's survival. Senators leaned in, papers in hand, their faces unreadable but their curiosity undeniable. The cameras rolled live. Millions of eyes watched, waiting to see if Karoline Leavitt would hold her ground or if the system would finally crush her. Senator Harold Green, known for his tough questions, addressed her first. Ms. Leavitt, your silence after the fine gave the impression you accepted guilt. Some say this sudden turn is a political stunt. Are you here to protect yourself or the truth? Karoline's expression didn't change. She had prepared for this moment. Senator, I stayed silent because I knew the system was waiting for me to panic to run. I didn't. I used that silence to find the trail they tried to bury. I'm here because the truth doesn't survive unless someone's willing to carry it through the fire. There was a murmur in the room. Green nodded slowly, perhaps impressed, perhaps just calculating. Another senator, known to support Roberts, pushed harder. You claim you uncovered financial ties. How can the public trust your evidence? These are serious allegations against a sitting Chief Justice. Karoline didn't blink. She clicked her remote, and a screen behind her lit up. Detailed transaction records, offshore bank links, timelines, and even confidential emails appeared. She had brought more than just words. She had proof. These records, she said, her voice steady, were not hacked, not stolen. They were provided by internal sources who could no longer tolerate the abuse of power. Some are sitting in this very room, afraid to speak, but the documents speak for them. The chamber fell quiet. Some senators shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with how direct this had become. The lead prosecutor, Michael Harper, who had remained mostly silent until now, stood up slowly. He looked at Karoline, then at the senators. "I was assigned to pursue Ms. Leavitt's fine. I was not told to investigate, I was told to punish. I want to state on record that the case was mishandled, that due process was ignored, that when I saw the evidence she brought forward, I realized I had been used to protect someone far more dangerous." Gasps broke across the room. Even the most careful senators couldn't hide their surprise. Robert's defense attorney, a sharp, cold man, quickly intervened. "Objection. This hearing is not a courtroom. We can't accept this as formal testimony." But the committee chair overruled him. "This is a public inquiry. Mr. Harper's statement will remain on the record." The pressure now turned on Roberts. He had remained distant throughout the scandal, issuing only brief denials. But this was the first time his defense was visibly shaken. His attorney requested a recess, trying to slow the momentum, but the chair denied it. Karoline seized the moment. "Your Honor, may I submit one more piece of evidence?" she asked. The chair nodded. She displayed an email chain between Roberts and a high-ranking trade official from the Eastern Alliance. In the emails, Roberts discussed strategic rulings that would benefit the alliance's corporate interests in exchange for private considerations. The wording was careful, but the meaning was impossible to miss. "Your attorney will say this is nothing," Karoline said, turning to the senators. "They'll say this is coincidence, misunderstanding. But ask yourselves, how many misunderstandings come with offshore accounts, secret meetings, and silenced voices?" The weight of her words settled over the room. Robert's lawyer tried to pivot, claiming the emails were taken out of context, but the damage was already done. The press outside was feeding updates to the public in real time. Across the nation, people were watching, listening, forming their own judgments. The committee called Roberts to appear. He declined, citing health reasons. The chair rejected the excuse and ordered a direct summons. Karoline knew they wouldn't give up so easily. As she left the chamber that day, she received another anonymous warning on her encrypted phone. "They're preparing a smear campaign. Personal attacks, family, finances, old cases. Be ready." She showed the message to Mia Lark. "They're switching to Plan B." Mia nodded. "They're out of moves. If they can't silence you in court, they'll try to bury you in headlines." That night, as Karoline sat in her quiet apartment, the first waves of the attack began. The morning of the next Senate hearing arrived, and the streets outside the Capitol were lined with news vans, cameras, and protesters. Some carried signs supporting Karoline Leavitt. Others demanded her resignation. The story had now gripped the entire nation. It was no longer about one fine or even one judge. It had become a battle for the integrity of the system itself. Inside the Senate chamber, Karoline sat calmly at the long wooden table, her hands folded. Her team was ready, but she knew this part she would face mostly alone. The committee members filed in, their faces tight with political pressure. They were no longer neutral, they were now trapped between two fires: public opinion and powerful figures desperate to keep their secrets hidden. Senator Harold Green, the chair, opened the session. His voice was steady, but the weight of the situation was clear. "We are here today to continue the inquiry into the conduct of Chief Justice John Roberts and the events surrounding the fine imposed on Ms. Karoline Leavitt." The floor recognizes Ms. Leavitt for her opening statement. Karoline stood, her voice clear and direct. "This is not about me. This is about a system that uses silence as a weapon. A system that expected me to walk away quietly to protect its walls from cracking. But those walls have already cracked. The people watching this deserve to know how deep that damage runs." She paused, letting her words settle, then displayed a new piece of evidence: flight records, private security schedules, and emails showing secret meetings between Roberts and foreign trade officials in a private resort overseas. The timing aligned perfectly with his questionable rulings back home. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. The senators exchanged glances, some looking visibly disturbed. Karoline continued. You've heard them say these documents are a misunderstanding? But here's a video from the resort's security footage. On the screen, Roberts appeared walking with the same foreign trade representative away from the cameras, their faces tense. Their conversation muted, but their secrecy undeniable. Roberts' defense attorney stood, trying to interrupt. Objection. This is circumstantial. The committee chair cut him off. You don't have authority to object here. This is a public hearing. Let the evidence speak. The public, watching live, exploded with reactions online. The narrative was shifting rapidly, and even the most loyal supporters of Roberts found themselves unsure. Karoline knew what would come next. The defense would try to paint her as politically motivated, desperate for attention. And as expected, Senator Linda Parks, a known Roberts ally, leaned into this. Ms. Leavitt, your history as a spokesperson for President Trump raises questions. How can we be sure this isn't just a personal political campaign disguised as a pursuit of truth? Karoline's response was calm, but her words were sharp. Senatora, I worked in politics, yes, but politics did not deliver me these files. Politics did not bribe Roberts. The evidence did not come from a campaign, came from within the system you all swore to protect. I'm not here for a party. I'm here because someone had to say. No. Senator Parks pressed on, but the public had already shifted. Journalists were now covering the hearings minute by minute. Online, the hashtag Roberts Files was trending worldwide. Michael Harper, the prosecutor who had once stood against Karoline, now sat beside her, prepared to testify in her favor. When called, he spoke with conviction. I was used as a tool to silence Ms. Leavitt. I was given orders, not options. But when I saw the timeline, the files, the financial trails, I realized I was being used to protect something much bigger. I regret participating in this abuse of power, and I stand ready to testify to every detail. The room held its breath. Harper's testimony flipped the narrative completely. Roberts' defense desperately requested that the committee dismiss the evidence. They argued about process, about context, about anything that could delay the collapse. But it was too late. The committee chair made it clear that an independent review would proceed, and that the Justice Department would now formally investigate Chief Justice Roberts. Karoline stepped out of the chamber that evening into a swarm of reporters. Microphones surrounded her, questions firing rapidly. How do you feel now? Do you think Roberts will resign? Are you afraid for your safety? Karoline stopped, looked directly into the cameras, and answered firmly. This was never about bringing anyone down. It was about not letting the system bring the truth down. I didn't plan to be in this fight, but once I saw what they were willing to do to silence me, I couldn't walk away. And I won't walk away now. Her words echoed across the country. That night, a leaked internal memo surfaced. Top figures tied to Roberts were meeting in private, planning their next move. Karoline's sources inside the system warned her this battle wasn't over. The network was bigger than Roberts alone, but Karoline no longer walked alone. Whistleblowers were reaching out. The media was following her lead. The public had chosen to watch. The next hearing promised something even more explosive. The walls they had built to protect themselves were finally beginning to fall. The pressure outside the courtroom was growing, like a storm that refused to break. News channels ran continuous updates. Public protests spread across cities. And whispers about deeper corruption reached the highest offices. Karoline Leavitt knew this was no longer about a fine or even about Chief Justice Roberts. It had become a fight against an entire system that had protected its own for decades. Inside her quiet office, late at night, Karoline sat reviewing a stack of anonymous documents that had been delivered to her earlier that day. Among them were payment trails for accounts linked not only to Roberts but to multiple federal judges, senators, and international lobbyists. The scale of the corruption was wider than she had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed. It was Michael Harper. "They're moving faster now," he said, his voice low. "Roberts isn't going to wait for the next hearing. He's calling in favors. I heard he's pushing for an emergency Supreme Court motion to block further investigations. They're trying to bury this." Karoline's heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. Let them try. She knew what she had to do next. If Roberts blocked the official investigation, the truth would never surface through normal channels. It was time to take the risk she had been avoiding. The next morning, Karoline appeared on a live primetime news special. The network, usually cautious about such bold stories, had finally agreed to let her speak unfiltered after seeing the overwhelming public interest. Seated across from respected journalist David Mason, Karoline was composed. The cameras were already broadcasting. "Across the nation, Ms. Leavitt," Mason began, "many say you've waged a personal war against Chief Justice Roberts. Are you prepared for what this will cost you?" Karoline looked directly into the camera. "This is not about me. It's about a system that tells people like me to sit down and be quiet while it makes its own rules. They're trying to shut me up because I didn't walk away. I have evidence that shows this corruption isn't limited to one man. It's connected to international deals, domestic policies, and private wealth hiding in plain sight." The air in the studio thickened. Mason pressed her, asking for proof. Karoline reached into her folder and produced a USB drive. These files trace financial movements between foreign shell companies and key U.S. officials. They show who's been pulling the strings behind closed doors. The producers, aware of the sensitivity, paused, but Karoline continued, speaking with precision. "This is bigger than a courtroom fine. This is about trust. About what we are willing to accept from those who claim to lead us." Across the country, viewers were glued to their screens. Social media flooded with real-time reactions. Karoline's words were cutting through the fog of political messaging. And now even international news outlets were picking up the story. Hours after the broadcast, Karoline's legal team received a sealed notice. Roberts had indeed filed an emergency motion to suppress further disclosure of the files. But something unexpected happened. The motion was denied by the other justices. It was the first public crack inside the highest court itself. Roberts' influence, once untouchable, was slipping. Karoline's team worked through the night, preparing for the next hearing. Her inbox filled with messages from whistleblowers, insiders, and even former political opponents who now saw the danger of letting such unchecked power remain hidden. Michael Harper returned to her side, no longer as a reluctant ally, but as a fierce supporter. "You've changed the game," he told her, "but they won't stop. They'll come at you harder now." Karoline met his gaze. "Ready." But the danger wasn't just legal. Security around Karoline had been quietly increased after reports surfaced that unidentified individuals had been spotted near her home and office. Harper insisted she stay under protection. She reluctantly agreed, but her resolve did not falter. The next morning, an anonymous source sent her something shocking. Internal memos from a foreign embassy that linked the financial trails to upcoming U.S. policy decisions. If true, this meant the corruption wasn't just about personal gain, was about shaping national policy for the benefit of outside forces. Karoline knew this was the missing piece. The next hearing would now decide not just Roberts' future, but whether the entire network of hidden power could finally be exposed. The pressure outside the courtroom was growing like a storm that refused to break. News channels ran continuous updates. Public protests spread across cities, and whispers about deeper corruption reached the highest offices. Karoline Leavitt knew this was no longer about a fine or even about Chief Justice Roberts. It had become a fight against an entire system that had protected its own for decades. Inside her quiet office late at night, Karoline sat reviewing a stack of anonymous documents that had been delivered to her earlier that day. Among them were payment trails for an accounts linked not only to Roberts but to multiple federal judges, senators, and international lobbyists. The scale of the corruption was wider than she had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed. It was Michael Harper. "They're moving faster now," he said, his voice low. "Roberts isn't going to wait for the next hearing. It's calling in favors. Sky heard he's pushing for an emergency Supreme Court motion to block further investigations. Sky trying to bury this." Karoline's heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. "Let them try." She knew what she had to do next. If Roberts blocked the official investigation, the truth would never surface through normal channels. It was time to take the risk she had been avoiding. The next morning, Karoline appeared on a live primetime news special. The network, usually cautious about such bold stories, had finally agreed to let her speak unfiltered after seeing the overwhelming public interest. Seated across from respected journalist David Mason, Karoline was composed. The cameras were already broadcasting. "Across the nation," Ms. Leavitt, Mason began, "many say you've waged a personal war against Chief Justice Roberts. Are you prepared for what this will cost you?" Karoline looked directly into the camera. "This is not about me. It's about a system that tells people like me to sit down and be quiet while it makes its own rules. They're trying to shut me up because I didn't walk away. I have evidence that shows this corruption isn't limited to one man. It's connected to international deals, domestic policies, and private wealth hiding in plain sight." The air in the studio thickened. Mason pressed her, asking for proof. Karoline reached into her folder and produced a USB drive. These files trace financial movements between foreign shell companies and key U.S. officials. They show who's been pulling the strings behind closed doors. The producers, aware of the sensitivity, paused, but Karoline continued speaking with precision. "This is bigger than a courtroom fine. This is about trust, about what we are willing to accept from those who claim to lead us." Crosta. Country viewers were glued to their screens. Social media flooded with real-time reactions. Karoline's words were cutting through the fog of political messaging. And now even international news outlets were picking up the story, hours after the broadcast. Karoline's legal team received a sealed notice. Roberts had indeed filed an emergency motion to suppress further disclosure of the files. But something unexpected happened. The motion was denied by the other justices. It was the first public crack inside the highest court itself. Roberts' influence, once untouchable, was slipping. Karoline's team worked through the night preparing for the next hearing. Her inbox filled with messages from whistleblowers, insiders, and even former political opponents who now saw the danger of letting such unchecked power remain hidden. Michael Harper returned to her side, no longer as a reluctant ally, but as a fierce supporter. "You've changed the game," he told her, "but they won't stop. They'll come at you harder now." Karoline met his gaze. "I'm ready." But the danger wasn't just legal. Security around Karoline had been quietly increased after reports surfaced that unidentified individuals had been spotted near her home and office. Harper insisted she stay under protection. She reluctantly agreed, but her resolve did not falter. The next morning, an anonymous source sent her something shocking. Internal memos from a foreign embassy that linked the financial trails to upcoming U.S. policy decisions. True, this meant the corruption wasn't just about personal gain. It was about shaping national policy for the benefit of outside forces. Karoline knew this was the missing piece. The next hearing would now decide not just Roberts' future, but whether the entire network of hidden power could finally be exposed. That evening, as the sun set behind the Capitol dome, Karoline stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters. One asked, "Do you believe you'll win?" Karoline paused, then answered quietly but firmly. "This was never about winning. It's about making sure they don't win by silencing us." She turned and walked into the building, knowing that the final battle was just ahead. "You said part 72 halves," ChatGPT said. The final hearing day arrived with the weight of the entire nation pressing down on the Washington, D.C. courthouse. The air outside buzzed with tension as protesters, journalists, and curious citizens filled the streets. Police barricades lined the sidewalks. Ooze helicopters hovered overhead. This was no longer just a legal dispute, had become a national reckoning. Inside the grand courtroom, Karoline Leavitt sat quietly at her table, her expression steady. Across from her, Chief Justice John Roberts appeared calm on the outside, but there was a subtle stiffness in his movements. His grip on his pen was tighter than usual. His legacy, his control, and perhaps his entire career now stood on the edge of collapse. Michael Harper, now firmly on Karoline's side, leaned in and whispered, "They'll try to break you today. Stay sharp." Karoline nodded. She wasn't afraid. The proceedings began. The public was allowed to watch through a live television feed. Millions across the country sat glued to their screens. The court clerk called the session to order. Roberts cleared his throat and began with cold authority. "This hearing is to determine the admissibility of the so-called evidence presented by Ms. Leavitt." But before Roberts could continue, Karoline's attorney stood and addressed the court firmly. "We request that Justice Roberts recuse himself from this case. He is directly implicated in the financial documents under review. He cannot rule on matters where his own conduct is in question." The room fell silent. The request was bold, unprecedented. Roberts' eyes flickered with irritation. This court. But before he could dismiss the motion, Associate Justice Alina Torres, known for her sharp independence, spoke up from the bench. "The motion is valid. Chief Justice Roberts, we must review your involvement before you can proceed." Roberts was forced to step back. For the first time, he was no longer in control. Karoline's legal team swiftly presented the evidence: the financial records, the foreign policy memos, the internal communications that showed Roberts' links to international lobbying groups. They connected the dots in front of the world, piece by piece, patiently and clearly. As each detail was revealed, a visible crack formed in the courtroom's usual order. Michael Harper addressed the justices directly, his voice firm. "This is not just about one individual. It's about a network that used the law to protect itself while silencing opposition. This fine against Ms. Leavitt was never about a communication violation. It was a warning to everyone who dares to speak the truth." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters furiously typed updates. Social media exploded. Karoline's final move came when she revealed her most powerful piece: a live testimony from a former senior staffer who had worked under Roberts. The witness, protected under whistleblower status, confirmed that Roberts had fast-tracked rulings to silence political figures who became inconvenient to certain private interests. The revelation sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Justice Torres spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of the court's authority. "Given the evidence and testimony, we will open a full judicial inquiry into the conduct of Chief Justice Roberts. The fine against Ms. Leavitt is hereby dismissed." The courtroom was still. Roberts sat frozen, his career unraveling in real time. Karoline did not celebrate. She simply gathered her documents, nodded respectfully to the bench, and left the courtroom with Harper. Outside, the media swarmed her, shouting questions. Cameramen jostled for position. Protesters cheered. Others stood in disbelief. A reporter asked, "Do you think justice has finally been served?" Karoline paused, her face calm but serious. "This is not justice. This is a beginning. Justice will come when the system can no longer be used to silence people like me. This was never about me. It was about the people watching who think they don't have a voice. They do, and it's time they use it." She walked toward the waiting car, Harper beside her. The weight of the past week slowly settled on her shoulders. She knew this victory came with risks. She knew the fight wasn't over. The system would push back. More powerful figures would emerge to defend what they had built in the shadows. But For now, a door had been opened. The story dominated headlines. 4 days. International outlets picked it up. Congressional committees announced formal reviews of judicial practices. Whistleblowers began stepping forward. The web that Roberts once controlled was falling apart, and Karoline Leavitt became not just a press secretary, but a symbol of resistance. Proof that courage, when faced with overwhelming power, could still make the walls crack. The storm wasn't over, but she had weathered the first wave, and she was ready for whatever came next.